Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So on this channel I've done over 80 optimized character builds over the past 6 years. Now that we have an updated rule set coming later this year, it seemed like the right time to go through those builds and tier rank them based on how good I think the build is, as well as the viewer response. I've already done a video going over my earliest builds. I'll link it in the video description, but in this video we're going to go over probably my most successful character builds, likely due to Tash's Cauldron of Everything being released during this period, opening up all kinds of new exciting interactions and character features. The orange border on the tokens for these builds means they're builds from 2020 or 2021, and there were 29 builds on this channel during those 2 years. If you're interested in revisiting any of the character builds I discuss, I've created a playlist for all the relevant videos linked in the video description. And a character sheet in D&D Beyond is still active and linked for each of those videos, except for the Stormlord, which apparently I deleted, though all the other build details are covered in the video. And we're going to start on January 6th, 2020, and my Alchemist Artificer Guide, which is my 29th build on this channel. It is no secret, I consider the Alchemist to be the weakest Artificer subclass, but I wanted to see if there was a way to at least make it viable. What I came up with was almost a comic book Bane style of character, a big brute filled with chemicals to enhance its fighting capability. Character name, R Mann. Get it? Elixir Man. Views on this one aren't bad, there are over 45,000. This is definitely not one of my most powerful builds, but the Alchemist was just never going to be that. But I did squeeze as much juice as possible out of this lackluster subclass, good enough for C tier. That brings us to January 13th, 2020, and the double-bladed scimitar for Eberron. So in addition to the new Artificer class, Wayfarer's Guide to Eberron gave us the double-bladed scimitar, and the Revenant Blade feat, which gives the weapon the finesse property. And I wanted to see how much the weapon could be optimized with a character named Kaelin, which isn't a pun, it's just a name. What I came up with was a Valinor Wood Elf Rogue Scout that utilized Elven Accuracy, the Sentinel feat, and Resilient Constitution to get every possible instance of sneak attack possible, both on and off turn, while not ignoring defense, including proficiency in the big 3 saving throws. The build didn't generate as much interest, with around 32,000 views. This could be because the Eberron rules might not have been available to as many players. The math for the damage looked pretty good, and if you're looking to make a straight melee rogue, I think the build is solid, good enough for C tier. On January 20th, I released the Shadowblade Assassin, character name Somel. This is the first time on this channel that I highlighted a build that I did not create. I was contacted by a viewer with a build they had designed that could potentially do over 1,000 points of damage on their turn, granted they had surprise. That's a pretty big if, of course, but I did like the idea of combining auto crits with the enhanced Shadowblade damage on top of the Whisper Bard Psychic Blades. I thought that was a great combination and interesting enough to present on the channel. I came up with an interaction of my own that I added onto the build, combining the auto crits with Steelwind Strike for some crazy multi-target damage. Now I am a bit iffy on putting a build that relies on getting surprised to work at peak efficiency at S tier, but this is one of my highest viewed builds ever, at over 131,000. So viewers, you win. This lands on S tier. Now if you play in a game where surprise happens fairly regularly, this build does deliver. On February 10th, 2020, I presented the Master of All Skills, character name Mads Kills. So this build was created in response to a trend that I had seen online. Someone talking about creating a character proficient in every skill like that was some kind of feat. Now, I figure it's pretty easy to make a character proficient in every skill, but what's harder is to actually be good with every skill, since you aren't going to be good with every ability score. I mean, if you're proficient in a skill for which you have a -1 ability modifier, even at level 20, that's just +5. What's even harder is to make the character not bad at anything that isn't a skill. So I went to work on this build, which ends up with a +10 or higher in every skill in the game, with expertise in 13 skills, and it's still semi-viable outside of skills. This build was not popular though. It has under 21,000 views. This is my second lowest viewed character build ever. And you know what? Fair enough. It is very much a gimmick build. I'm not sure I see the value in actually being good in every single skill. So as a thought experiment, I am glad I did it. But as an optimized build, it's got to be ranked D. Then that brings us to March 16th, 2020, and the Stormlord. This is a build for Matt Mercer's Blood Hunter class, so it's not official content. 38,000 plus views for third-party content. I mean, that's not bad. The Stormlord combines the Blood Hunter, which can add lightning damage to every attack, with the Tempest Cleric, which can push a creature you deliver lightning damage to 10 feet. Then you add on Sentinel and Polar Master, and it means when an opponent comes into reach, you can opportunity attack them, add lightning damage, they're pushed 10 feet away, their speed becomes 0, all while they're safely out of reach. I think it's a pretty cool combination, and I'm still pretty satisfied with the build I came up with for the class, but with moderate views, I can't justify more than C tier. That brings us to April 20th, 2020, and the Subterranean Slayer. So I still think this is a cool build, and it got over 43,000 views. So it combines the Gloomstalker Ranger with Hand Crossbow, Crossbow Expert, and Sharpshooter. Now, these days, yes, that's a very well-known combination, but not so much in 2020. But then I combined it with Forge Cleric and Spirit Guardians. So instead of, the Cleric build that upcasts Spirit Guardians and then casts cantrips, which honestly is totally viable, well, instead of cantrips, this character does Gloomstalker hand crossbow attacks for huge hits on top of Spirit Guardians. I think this is good enough of a build to hit B tier, though it does rely largely on being in darkness, as Gloomstalkers tend to. Then on April 27th, I released my guide to the Light Domain Cleric, character name, Burn This Way, a Garden Variety Cleric. So there are no unintuitive interactions with this build. This is very much just a build appreciating the light domain and the versatility that subclass provides. It's a pretty standard cleric build with build decisions I consider, optimal for clerics, and views were good on this one, over 71,000. If you want a solid, just straight cleric build without relying on being in darkness or underground, you just want a solid character that's a cleric, Burn This Way is a good option. It's a solid B tier, and it would be A, except there's nothing really clever here. It's just intuitive cleric build decisions. Okay, so then Explorer's Guide to Wildmount came out, and the Chronergist Wizard became official D&D content. But the subclass I thought was being overlooked was the Graviturgist. So on May 11th, I released a Tactical Blaster. This is primarily a Graviturgist Wizard with an Artificer Armor dip. This character utilizes the features of the subclass to control positioning and movement of the enemies. It is particularly strong against groups of enemies. The tactics are a little more complex, and so I ended up having to split it up into 4 parts due to length. And online, the Graviturgist was just being overshadowed by the more obvious power of the Chronergist, and I think those factors led to this build not getting the attention that I personally think it deserved. And it's currently at a little over 37,000 views, and the 4th part, which is where I actually go over the cool interactions, is currently under 10,000 views. If you want to see why the Graviturgist is an underrated subclass, maybe check this build out, or at least the 4th part. It's a bit over 20 minutes in length, but currently, I have to rank this at C tier. This one is kind of frustrating, as I presented some tactics I think are really interesting and effective, but hey, maybe you'll be inspired to check this one out. My next build was released on July 20th, 2020, and was the Oath of Glory Paladin Build Guide. This was shortly after the subclass was first published in Mythic Odysseys of Theros. Character name, No Guts, No Glory. This is a straight Paladin build, so if you want to build a Paladin that doesn't multiclass at level 7, I spent some time going over the higher level Paladin features and the optimal build decisions. This is a Spear and Shield build, utilizing Polar Master and Mounted Combatant, so this is my first mounted build. Views were decent at over 48,000, which is enough to justify B tier for the Glory Paladin. Okay, up to this point I hadn't done an Echo Knight build, so that came next with the Guardian. This was released on August 10th, 2020, so the Guardian, as you might expect, is built as a party defender. The primary play of this build is you combine the Echo Knight's Echo with the Sentinel feat and the Ancestral Barbarian's Ancestral Protectors to lock down enemies so that they can't attack the Guardian, but they have disadvantage to attack anyone else. Some War Mage on top of this adds Fire Shield and Arcane Deflection, which aren't invalidated by a Barbarian's Rage, for additional enemy punishment and tanking capability. The novel idea of this build is to show how you can be a party tank without taking all that damage. This was a very popular build, sits at over 95,000 views, which is enough to land it in S tier. Then on August 17th, I released the Forcelance. This is the second build on this channel that wasn't my build. It was shared by a member of my Discord, and I asked if they would like me to do a video presenting it to my viewers, and they seemed keen on that. So, the Forcelance uses an unintuitive interaction where an enemy provokes an opportunity attack by moving into the range of a polearm with the polearm master feat, eating Spirit Guardian's damage as they do, but instead of attacking with the polearm, Warcaster is used to fire Eldritch Blast at the enemy with Repelling Blast, pushing them away again. This is an interaction that works according to the way the rules are worded, but maybe not as they were intended. The views on this one are a bit under 45,000. It's not bad, enough to land this one in B tier. Okay, that takes us to September 7th, 2020, and my Eldritch Knight build. Now, if you watched my last video, you'll be aware my last Eldritch Knight build had to land at D ranking because of an error on spell selection, meaning I was presenting a build that wasn't legal. And I wanted to make a solid Eldritch Knight straight class build that was 100% by the rules. So, a Wee Eldritch Knight does that. It also uses my favorite race, the Halfling. And views are pretty good, at over 57,000, enough for a B tier ranking. Then on September 14th, 2020, I released How to Play an Arcane Trickster. Now, I had already done spell selection analysis for both Eldritch Knights and Arcane Tricksters, and the only Arcane Trickster I had presented on this channel up to now was for beginners and only went to level 4. So Stabby McStabberson went right to level 20, and the focus on the build was how spells take the Arcane Trickster to a level that's unachievable by other rogue subclasses. Solid views for this one, over 74,000, and that's enough to rank Stabby at A tier. Then on November 23rd, 2020, a personal favorite, I released The Voice from Beyond. This is a build that I played before I ever released it on my channel, and I remember it very well. It is largely a thematic build, but it's a Great Old One patron warlock, and it combines Misty Visions, Mask of Many Faces, the Actor feat, and Awakened Mind to create a highly creepy and mysterious character that nobody, not even the party, knows what they actually look like or what they sound like. From an optimization standpoint, this is a solid warlock build, but from a fun-to-play standpoint, this is S tier for sure. Now, views were decent at over 56,000, which is normally enough for B tier. So I'm going to compromise and put it to A tier because I think the synergy of the features is really unusual and cool. This is also the last build on this channel before Tasha's was released. So my first build using Tasha's was the Shock Jock, released April 5th, 2021, and this is actually my third lightning damage specialist. I mean, days after Tasha's was released, patrons and I were discussing the possibility of combining the new Order of Scribes wizard that could convert wizard spells to lightning damage with the pushing capability of the Tempest Cleric. One particular patron came up with the idea of using Magic Missile converted to lightning damage to activate the pushing feature several times in a row with a single spell. And they played the build in a one-shot I was DMing, and we talked about featuring the build in a video afterwards. So this is the third build on this channel that isn't primarily my build. Views are solid at over 74,000, and I think it's an interesting way to take advantage of damage type switching of the Scribes Wizard. So I'm going to rank the Shock Jock at A tier. The next post-Tasha's build was Chuck, released on April 12th, 2021. So Chuck is my first thrown weapons build, and what I want to do was utilize the new slasher feat with thrown weapons to slow enemies at range. This build is probably obsolete though because it uses the Legacy Kobold and relies on the now non-existent Pack Tactics Kobold feature. It was also a source of frustration for me that thrown weapons optimized builds presented online didn't deal with the issue of reliable damage, as if you are throwing weapons, you can't possibly count on them all being magical. But Chuck can, because of Artificer and the returning weapon infusion. Views are okay at over 43,000, which would normally be enough for B tier, but you know what? I am still not sold on the effectiveness of thrown weapon builds, even with reliable damage, so I'm going to bump this one down to C tier. Next up on April 26th is the team up on the Rune Knight with Colby from D4 Deep Dive. This is our first collab, and we both made Rune Knights and compared them in the video. My build was Will Maymu, a Rune Knight multiclass with Dow Genie Warlock for spike growth, reach, and pushing. It also combines the Slasher and Crusher feats, which is something, I just wanted to try out so you could both push and slow the same enemy with the same attack. At 45,000 views, this is enough for a B tier ranking, but you know what? I'm going to bump it to C, because there was an error on the build. One of the tactics that the build was supposed to be able to deliver on assumed applying bludgeoning damage to an opportunity attack. But since Genie Patron Warlock only adds the damage type to an attack on your turn, it doesn't work. I'm still going to give it a C because I think it's a good build, even without that tactic. So my next build was released on May 3rd, 2021, and is the Real Mage Hunter. Character name, Bad Kitty. This, like the Master of All Skills and Chuck, was a response to a build type that I'd seen online that I figured I could bring a new viewpoint towards. So Mage Hunter builds have been around as long as mages have, and usually they're not spellcasters themselves. Except when you have spells like Silence and Counterspell in the game, I just think the best Mage Hunter is going to use a bit of the enemy's tricks against them. Bad Kitty is a build that's built to go first in combat, move out of Counterspell range, quicken a Silence spell, then move back all the way up to the mage, grapple them, and then kill them. Views are decent at over 54,000, and I think this build is really good at what it does. But it is really, really specialized, so I can't justify more than a C tier. But if a Mage Hunter is what you're looking for, I do think this build works pretty well. Okay, so we are about to come to the streak. So over the next 8 months, I released 10 builds, and every single one of the 10 builds did amazing on views. So we're going to be filling out that A and S tiers a lot here in the next 10. And on May 10th, I released the Do-It-All Mage, Tuff the Buff. And this is my top viewed video on my channel, whether it's a character build or otherwise, period. Tuff the Buff currently has over 229,000 views. This is like 10 times the amount of views that my videos normally get. Tuff the Buff dips Order Domain Cleric and then goes Clockwork Soul Sorcerer to get a spell list that covers all bases. It's an excellent buffer, battlefield controller, crowd controller, blaster, and debuffer. The idea of this build is no matter what you're facing, you will have something useful to do. And yeah, we know it's S tier because it's not just the most viewed build on this channel, it's also the most viewed by a mile, and has more upvotes than any other video on this channel as well. Then on May 28th, I released my first Chronergist Wizard build, the Arty Chron. Character name, Arty Chron. This is another build that is me presenting somebody else's ideas, though I did put my own touches on it. So the idea is simple enough. Dip Artificer, then go straight Chronergist, and utilize the broken subclass to do broken stuff. Not a surprise, this one did well with over 91,000 views. Definitely an easy A tier. Lots of Doctor Who references in this video as well, if you are a fellow Whovian. Then on June 7th, I released my Fey Wanderer Ranger Warlock build. This is a combination of archery and the fear-inducing features from Fey Wanderer Ranger and Undead Patron Warlock. Character name, Quiver, so got a bit of a double meaning there. Views are over 109,000, so this is one of my more popular builds. So the interaction I came up with is that you shoot someone for good damage, then you frighten them, and then they're stuck at range. This is not my first enemy movement controller, but I think it's a good one, and it gets S tier. I mean, any build that gets over 100,000 views, I'm not going to argue with that kind of response. Then my Soul Knife Rogue build. So the concept of this character is just to be immensely good at the things you would expect a rogue to be able to do. Character name, Rob Berry. The reroll capability of this character is pretty much unmatched. I mean, if you fail at a skill check, an attack roll, or a saving throw, you're either going to add a bonus or just roll again. I think it's a very strong rogue build, and so did you, with 86,000 views plus an easy A tier ranking for the Soul Knife. Then on July 9th was my Wildfire Druid build. Now, everyone online seemed to be talking about the Stars Druid, and me being me, I like to do a video where I show that, maybe you're overlooking something even better. Tip the Scales is a Lizardfolk Wildfire Druid with a dip in Arcana Domain Cleric, and it's really built around highlighting just how immensely useful the Wildfire Spirit pet is. Views are good at over 77,000. That's A tier territory, and if you want a great battlefield controller, I think this is a terrific build for that purpose. Then on July 30th, 2021 was my straight damage build. Guess what it does? Character name, Whoopie Yass. Combines Fighter, Barbarian, Cleric, Druid, and Ranger. The idea is simple enough. Ignore defense. Well, I mean mostly ignore defense. I can't do that entirely. But compile as many attacks as possible with as many damage bonuses to those attacks as possible to push the potential damage numbers as high as possible. The purpose of this build was never to recommend it as a build that you should actually play, but to more see how we can stretch out weapon attacks and how conventional wisdom on things like, say, a Ranger's Hunter's Mark with bonus actions compared to using a bonus action with an extra attack go out the window when enough attacks are being compiled. Over 95,000 views on this one, and even if you don't play the build, I do think there's a lot of information on this one that can be applied to weapon-based builds generally, and it's A tier for Whoopie Yass. So at this point, I'd been dunking on the Monk class for years, with good reason I think, but I have to admit, the Way of Mercy subclass is so good that for the first time I think it made the Monk class viable for optimized builds. I was also seeing some other so-called optimized builds for this subclass take things like the Martial Adept feat for the unarmed fighting combat style, which is absolutely awful on a Mercy Monk. I go through the math in the video. So I wanted to show how to make a Mercy Monk with the options I consider to be the most optimal with my build. Character name, Mercy Beaucoup. If you liked the movie Big Trouble in Little China, you might enjoy my lead into the build. If not, you probably didn't know what the hell I was talking about. Either way, great response here with over 87,000 views, and honestly, I made a Mercy Monk for the playtest recently, which performed reasonably well, but it was still worth it for me to revisit this build just to remind myself of the optimization strategy. Easy A tier here. So next up on November 15th, I released my Dowlock Warlock build. So this is a straight Warlock Genie Patron with the Dow for spike growth, and then a whole lot of force movement with Repelling Blast, Grasp of Vidar, Crusher, and Telekinetic. Conventional wisdom up to Tasha's was that Hexblade was a subclass for Warlocks, and for dips, maybe that's still true. But for characters that go a bit deeper into Warlock, the Genie Patron, particularly combined with the Dow option, would become the new king of Warlock subclasses. Spike Growth plus Repelling Blast is a fantastic combination, though with this build I really pushed in as much force movement as possible and included other status effects, so pushing and pulling was still effective with flying enemies or what have you. Players were really excited about this new subclass, and the video has over 148,000 views, and that's an easy S tier. And I don't really see any disputes these days that the Dow Genie Warlocks are the premier optimal choice for Warlock builds. Next up on November 19th, 2021, I released the Fiend Lock. So, as I was just discussing, the paradigm for Warlock subclasses really changed with Tasha's. And there was another solid contender in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and I remember when I decided to do a Fiendlock build. Number of optimizers were discussing what's the new best subclass for Warlock, and of course, Genie Pact was probably top of the list, but then, for second place, maybe Hexblade, maybe Undead, maybe Fathomless, and I remember thinking, what about Fiend Patron? The one from the player's handbook. I decided the optimization community hadn't fully appreciated what a Fiendlock could do, particularly if you're not multiclassing out of Warlock. In my view, Fiend is definitely a contender for that number 2 position, so I decided to make a build to show why. Character name, asking for a Fiend. Really good views here, over 80,000, but if you don't know why the Fiend Patron is one of the Warlock's best subclasses, this might be a build to check out. A tier, and the next time you play a Warlock, you might just ask for a Fiend. So it should be pretty clear to viewers of this channel, or even viewers of this video, that I love to take something the community seems to agree is bad, and show how they've missed something. The Arcane Archer video was released on December 10th, 2021, to do exactly that. Character name, the Straight and Arrow Path, highlights how powerful Grasping Arrow is, and how it's much more powerful than anything a Battlemaster fighter can do, even if it's not usable as often, and how to build a character around it. And there are more than 126,000 views on this video, which has more likes than the Dowlock build. Easy S tier for the Straight and Arrow Path. Something to really consider if you want to play an archer and do something really cool in addition to the damage. And that finishes up the streak of highly viewed builds because my next build video didn't do as well. It was in response to viewer requests for a video that presents multiple builds that employ teamwork tactics. and I have had several requests since for this exact kind of video, presumably from the many viewers who didn't watch this one and don't know it's already been done. I presented 3 complementary builds with Grapple Death Squad. So Grapple Death Squad employs one character to lay down a spike growth, another to cast the haste spell, and then the third character is now a hasted grappler that grapples the enemy and drags them to death through the spike growth. At the time, this was just a concept, but by the time this video becomes public, there's probably going to be a video on CMCC builds where 2 friends and I made the Grapple Death Squad with some minor adjustments and absolutely tore his 10th level gauntlet to shreds. This combination, it's absolutely broken. And I'll be revisiting it again soon in a video, but for whatever reason, this one just didn't do whatever it needed to do to get the clicks. At just over 31,000, that ended my streak. If you've never optimized around grapple and drag in a teamwork combination, I will warn you, this combination is broken. It's absolutely busted. It does many times the damage you're going to be able to do without teamwork combinations, so it is great for a one-shot or tearing through a gauntlet, but it might not be the best for an extended campaign. You're going to find yourself doing the same thing over and over because it's so much more effective than anything else you can do. But with those views, though, I can't give it more than C tier. No, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to put it in S tier. This is one of the most effective combinations I have ever come up with, maybe the most. So I kind of have to overrule the audience here. I don't know why it didn't get the clicks, but it definitely deserves S tier. And that's all my builds from 2020 and 2021. In my final build ranking video, I'll cover 2022 and 2023, which is 27 more character builds, mostly done in 2022. In 2023, I was busy covering playtests most of the time. And that video is going to finish up my tier rankings for builds on this channel, and I hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. The content on this channel is thanks to the patrons who support my work. Today I'm thanking my Thaumaturge level patrons, but if you would be willing to support this content at any level, please click the Patreon link in the video description. Thanks to Airhead, Alex R, Vo, Bloody 9, Atherzone, CJ, Chris C, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Dudis Noob, Eden, Eric Wasserman, Evan Getting, FBKO5, Gishlife, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jeruru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Lars V, Mark D, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Speed Shadow, Thunderlock, and William Whittles.